Hello, team. All right, let's get into it. So, for homework tonight, you're going to read part 3 of the Metamorphosis, and you're going to be doing this totally on your own. So, if you search YouTube, there might be some audiobooks, but I'm not going to record a read aloud of this because I want you to kind of get used to having to do this on your own. And I just want to put it out there that this needs to happen. Otherwise, you're going to find the work that's assigned tomorrow to be very difficult. So we're coming into, you have extra space, right? You have 2 school days to get your homework done. And if there's a weekend in there, then you have even more, which is great. But you really need to complete the reading of part 3 before you start to do that work, because otherwise you're going to find it really tough. Okay, so let's talk about what we're doing today. So yesterday we were generating our own central ideas and supporting them. Today we're going to be working with central ideas that are more complex and have more kind of moving parts. And we're going to first work on figuring out what they mean, and then we're going to work on supporting them. Okay? And we're going to do one together because the first that we'll be working with is more difficult than the other 2. So we're going to do that one together, and then you should be okay for the other 2. All right. So we're going to look at the first one together, and here's what it says. Corporations are dehumanizing workers, thereby creating a sense of isolation from the modern world. Okay, that's a lot. It's complicated. There might even be language in there that you don't know. So let's break it down. So corporations are the same thing as, as businesses. So we could change that and say businesses are dehumanizing workers, thereby creating a sense of isolation from the modern world. Okay, so talking about businesses, I'm talking about the people that work for them. I still really don't know what dehumanizing means. So let's break that down. Dehumanizing means that we are not treating someone or a group of someone's like a person. So we're not giving them rights. We are treating them as though they're at fault for the problems in society. We're not getting them the health care we need. So basically, we're talking about them as if they were animals or as if they were objects. And the reason that happens is because that makes it easier to oppress that group or to hurt that group if we don't really think about the fact that they're human too and they have emotions and lives and all that kind of stuff. So an example of this would be, for instance, in World War II, the Nazis were dehumanizing Jews by putting them in concentration camps and not giving them basic rights to food, water, things like that, healthcare. They were dehumanizing them by performing experiments on them in concentration camps, so treating them as if they were, cells in a lab, instead of like the breathing, feeling humans that they are. They also put out a bunch of propaganda, so fake news about like Jews were like pigs. They were, and the reason that Germany was having all these problems in the 1930s. They also did this for African Americans. This happens all the time through a whole bunch of different cultures. It's happening now. So, for instance, when people say all lives matter, this is actually a form of dehumanizing Black lives because it allows people who say that to ignore that Black lives people are being killed, we're not afforded basic rights, don't have basic access to healthcare, things like that. When we ignore that this group of people is human, it allows us to treat them like they're not. Okay? So let's kind of take all of that and look at our central idea again. So corporations or businesses are dehumanizing workers. So they're treating workers like property or like objects. And that creates a sense of isolation from the modern world. So that makes the workers feel like disconnected from what's going on outside of work, their family, their friends, all that kind of stuff. Okay, I think I've pretty well figured that out. So I'm actually going to go to my assignment. And when I look at that, the first thing I need to do is explain what that means. So I'm going to put what we just said. So businesses are treating workers like objects or like property. And this makes workers feel isolated from the parts of the world that are not their job. Okay, so then I'm going to give some examples in my own words. So when I was just out of college, I'm going to use a personal one and the bigger one. So when I was just out of college, I worked in the Bronx at an after school like art center. And my boss there had like crazy, ridiculous expectations of me. Like she expected me to get there super early at 8 in the morning, even though she knew that my commute was like long because I lived in Harlem. Then she expected me to stay until classes were over at like 9 o'clock at night. And she just like expected all these things from me that were not part of my own job. So if you wanted to use a personal example here, or maybe there's something, from an adult in your life that you could add, a kind of bigger world society example that I want to use is like people can get email on their phones. So they never get to separate really from work and from what their bosses are asking. So people can check email on their phone at any time, and this means they never really get a break from work. And I'm going to say also because their bosses expect them to check it. And I see this all the time with my dad. Like, honestly, guys, he was writing a work email at my wedding when he saw me the first time. Like, this is real. Okay. So now that I've kind of done this in my own words, I'm going to go back to the story and I'm going to find evidence. Well, this makes me think of when Gregor is talking about his job and how he has to keep it to pay his family's debt. So that's in part 1. And I'm going to be scanning that and looking for, a piece of evidence. And I think I found one right here on the first page. So he says at the bottom of the first page, he's talking about his job. And he says, whenever I go back to the guest house during the morning to copy out the contract, these gentlemen are always sitting there eating their breakfasts. I ought to just try that with my boss. I get kicked out on the spot. So if Gregor takes a break to eat breakfast, his boss will fire him. That's what I'm getting from that. That's messed up, guys. So what I just said in my own words would be part of my explanation. So for evidence, I'm going to put the actual quote. So I'm going to say, so then, so I have my evidence, and now I'm going to put my explanation. So what I said before is going to be part of that. So if Gregor tries to take a break to eat breakfast, his boss will fire him. So his boss isn't allowing him the basic human right of eating when you're hungry. So one thing you might not know, but that I'm going to include here, is that there are actually laws about taking breaks. Like, you're required to have a specific amount of breaks. Like, that's part of my job as a teacher. Like, there's a law that says that I'm supposed to have a lunch break and I'm supposed to have another break during the day. So I'm going to include that here. So there are laws. Teachers are required to have breaks and meal breaks. And his boss is breaking the law. Boom. Okay. I feel like I kind of have a handle on that one. I think maybe it could still be a little bit confusing, and that's fine. But the other two are kind of more in line with what we usually generate together. So central idea number 2, communication is essential. That means like necessary, or it's a must-have for any relationship and for society. And central idea number 3, change is important, and one person's transformation can affect others. So if one person changes, it can affect other people when they change. Okay? So if you feel like you got it, go ahead. We're going to work on this a little bit on our next call. And you can always text me and ask me questions if you need help.